Gives me very distinct pleasure to kick off today's conversation with Tariq Khan. I'm Michael Diamond. I'm the Academic Director of the Integrated Marketing and Communications Department at NYU School of Professional Studies in our Division of Programs in Business. And we are lucky and fortunate to count Tariq Khan as one of our faculty members, a very distinguished member of our faculty teaching across areas of leadership and marketing and many formative subjects that are helping to really shape a new set of emerging professionals in the field. Tariq has a very distinguished history himself as a leader at institutions like MetLife and ING, and he'll share some of that with you in his journey. He's written a really wonderful, reflective, thoughtful and very structured book for us who are educators. He's gone to the lengths of putting in learning outcomes by chapters and really clearly thought about how the lessons he's learned from life and from these many conversations, some of which he'll share with you with senior leaders, can be interpreted and packaged and inculcated for students and teachers and professionals more generally. So I think I commend the book to you highly, Leadership in Changing Times, sorry. And I am looking forward to this dialogue. One thing I would ask everybody, if you have questions, we're going to leave plenty of time for questions. If you pop them in the Q&A that's at the bottom of the screen, hopefully all Zoom screens have those two little speech bubbles. If you write your questions in there, we'll be able to pick them up and I'll try and integrate them into the conversation. That's the easiest way to get hold of us. And then the only thing probably, I will end with before we jump into the formal conversation is to thank two colleagues of mine behind the scene, Robin Smith and Patrick Brady, who have made today possible. So great. Tariq, as I've said already, you are a very admired member of our faculty. You've been teaching leadership. You're helping guide students and young professionals to the next stage of their career. And you also lead a wonderful company that is committed to training and advancing global diversity. And so, you're clearly an expert and someone we're pleased to welcome to discuss this topic of leadership. But I'm always intrigued to sort of better understand how it all began. When did this sort of passion and interest in leadership or business or entrepreneurship, whatever, where did that all start? What if you could share that with us?
Great. Michael, first of all, I'd like to thank NYU for giving me this opportunity, and especially thank to you for your leadership and partnership. It was very important for me to launch the book and select what is the first place that I'm going to launch the book. And it was an easy decision because NYU has been probably the most complementing part of my learning journey. For the last 16 years, I've been affiliated with this great institution. And all the partners that we work at SBS, they have been great over the years. So I'm truly honored that I'm a part of this institution, one of the largest universities in the world, and we are launching our first launch right here at NYU. Coming back to your question, how it all started. I started teaching at NYU in 2005, and when you are a busy professional, you just want to take some courses to probably give back to the students, and you like the interaction. Over the years, I had an opportunity to read many good books by some great authors. And even when I was a student myself, one of the challenges that we see in the academic books, some great author puts a lot of good content, but the students in the feedback always say that the book was boring. And, it's very difficult because, academic books are not meant to be a lot of fun, but there's a lot of content in there. And over the years that all the books that I read, I found them, one book had one thing which is great, and the other one probably had more storytelling element. But what I found was missing from all these was a simple approach that someone who is a young student starting a professional life can understand, what leadership is and how to go about that. And even if you're a seasoned leader in an organization or an entrepreneur, you can get something out of this in a simplified way. Of course, I don't want to oversimplify the process, but this started in 2018 when I thought about that, hey, I'm going to write a book. And obviously people don't realize, how difficult that process is. So I started this writing in 2018. And by January of 2020, I was almost 80% done with the book. And I was very excited. And then when you throw COVID-19 on top of that, everything in this world changed, right? And I said, oh my God, this, although the title in 2018 was the same, Leadership in Changing Times. So the only thing that was really appealing and I didn't want it to change was the title. Because times had changed and I never predicted that it would change so quickly. So I had to go back and I interviewed some C-suite leaders in this. I had to go back to them and say, hey, our world has changed. So it took me another little over a year to just rewrite it and then come to the process where it is now ready and ready to be launched.
And can I take you back even further, though, if you wouldn't mind, Tariq, to your childhood in Pakistan? Because it seems to me that the really formative lessons, that inform this book to some extent were really shaped by your experience, very unique experience. I think your family had a very prominent role to play in Pakistan. I wonder if you might share some of that with our listeners, with our students.
Yeah, and what happens, Michael, what I've realized writing the book, obviously, it's like, it doesn't make me the best leader in the world, writing the book. If you know everything about leadership, that doesn't mean that you are a great leader. I'm still working on it. It's like a doctor who knows everything about how to stay healthy, but many of them are not healthy themselves, right? So I think we are all born with a lot of traits of leadership. And as we grow, the world and our parents, our family members, the society really stifle our creativity to be a leader. And I didn't have the coaching that I'm able to provide to people when I was growing up. But I always saw one thing. Now it's all in in hindsight when I look at it. Whether playing the game of cricket, which I played in Pakistan as a young, I wanted to be the team captain because I wanted to lead people and I wanted challenge. This is a time when we had a military dictatorship in Pakistan. And, I was not even a teenager and I had one brother, older brother, and both of our parents got arrested because they were fighting for restoration of democracy. And, they went to jail. And this is, where we are, a 12-year-old with a 15-year-old brother, and we didn't know how to survive. And that dictatorship continued for 11 years. So we really learned the resilience and, how to live on our own. And sometimes the circumstances probably becomes the best university for you. And over the years, I realized that, the resilience, the commitment, the intuition that you need, it was there. Now, when obviously I went to school and, went into corporate America, everything was really polished in that sense. But I think the biggest learning that I've shared in the book is coming out of my experience with working with people and seeing, which at age 25, sometimes you're not able to comprehend and capture. And as you get older, you try to look back at that and say, okay, this is a time to share with everyone what I've learned.
Yeah, well, you seem to have really been able to kind of curate those thoughts and hone them into something very very productive and powerful. You talk early in the book, and I was intrigued by this phrase about the idea of the aspiration of the book was to simplify leadership. And I wonder if you could say a little bit more about this idea of simplifying leadership, because I think many of us, maybe those who've held leadership positions and certainly those who aspire to them, think it's probably quite complicated and a hard thing to do. So could you sort of expand on that a little bit, this notion of simplifying leadership and why you think that's critical?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think leadership is simple. Leaders are complicated, right? Because leadership itself is not executed until a leader practices it. And there is a quote in my book which says, there are two ways to solve a problem: simple and complicated. Interestingly, complicated is more popular, right? And I'm a victim of that. Sometimes we overcomplicate things. And I don't want to oversimplify it, but I've seen many leaders who really complicate their leadership. For example, they create the problems that don't exist. And, working with so many great leaders, I've seen that sometimes they become their own competitor and they create an environment which is totally unnecessary and could be easily avoidable. For example, we all know that if you're a great leader and you have exposure out there, you should stay out of controversial scandals. Now, this is all about self-control. We have seen many great leaders falling victim to scandals that they should never be a part of. Now, it's as simple as it gets that you just need self-control. And somehow they really lose that capacity of doing that. Some great leaders fall to anger, and there are habits that leaders have that they know that this can get them into trouble, but they continue doing that. So obviously, when you read the book, there are a lot of examples, how some great leaders fall to things that, after the problem happened, they say, oh my God, how could I have lost everything that I've created just by being so, so naive?
Do you think then that the task of leadership has grown more complicated, perhaps say even under COVID? I think you in the book, and as you mentioned up front, you had to sort of rethink some of the things you were writing about to deal with a unique and particularly challenging change in society. So do you have a sense that perhaps either that leadership's become more complicated, or perhaps just the breadth of issues and domains that a leader needs to be aware of have expanded significantly?
Yeah, I think COVID-19 was probably once in a lifetime event. Obviously, the biggest loss that the world has seen was over 4.5 million lives that we have lost so far. There has never been a time in the history where every leader, whether you're running a company of 3 people or a company with 250,000 people or a country with 1.4 billion people, every single leader was tested in their own capacity. What happens sometimes is not in your control, but how you react to it is very much in your control. And I think COVID-19 probably was one of the biggest teachers in the history. And if COVID-19 couldn't change us and bring something good out of us, I don't know what will. So I think this was a once in a lifetime opportunity where leaders have looked at things and really from a different perspective, and it gave them an opportunity. Now, sadly enough, I saw a lot of them failed in this leadership, right? Having lost so many lives, people who are distressed, the mental health, a lot of things we are not even seeing the impact. But when you look at it from a different lens, I think that this was a great opportunity, a learning opportunity for the world. And some leaders really stood out, and it was the same circumstances that were given to virtually everyone. But most of the leaders were not prepared for a situation. No one was prepared, but that's why you're a leader, because leadership is an asset and liability. So you have to be very careful about that. And I think this was a great opportunity for those who are not leaders to even look at the whole journey and say, what could have been done different? And if you're a student of leadership, I think this is a case study for the rest of your life.
I have a sense, though, from reading the book that you feel perhaps that many leaders did not actually rise to the occasion during COVID, and you actually used the phrase somewhere in the book about a leadership bankruptcy, and I found that a fascinating idea, and that we may be experiencing, despite the fact of a lot of ostensible leaders or very public leaders, and amplified by social media and television, all sorts of other outlets. There appears to be a lot of leaders running around, but you might argue there was some leadership bankruptcy. I wonder if you could expand on that idea and what you think that, what kind of implications that might have for society or already has, perhaps.
Yeah, that's a great question, Michael. So the reason I would call leadership bankruptcy, and this is very related to COVID-19, this pandemic, we lost 4.5 million people in over 200 countries. But when you look at the top 6 countries, they contributed for almost 60 or 70%. I don't know the exact, but I have written that in the book. US is a great country with one of the most advanced medical system. We have lost over 750,000 people. India with 1.3 billion people, their numbers are also not complementary, Brazil and some of these countries. What could have been done to prevent this? And I'm not saying that the loss was zero, but there were so many lapses in leadership. And when you look at some of the countries, all those smaller countries like New Zealand and some of the countries now, Pakistan, for example, I quoted as in the book, US has a population of 320 million people. Pakistan has a population of 220 million people. So it's not that. US has lost 750,000 people. Pakistan has lost 28,000 people. That's a country with virtually no resources compared to US. And some of the countries in Europe, I think there was a combination of arrogance and ignorance, which led to this situation. First of all, we denied that there is no COVID-19 and we overcome that. Then after that, we were in an anger mode that why this is not generated by us, why are we going through that? And then the time that we took to adjust to the problem and address the problem was really delayed. And had we taken something much sooner, we would be in a different situation. Now, we all know, living in New York, Michael, there's not a single New Yorker that I can think of who has not lost someone that they know very well. And we have all lost people. And even if half of the lives were saved, we probably would be very different today. I have lost some very close friends. One of my close friend, Michael Fung, who was a former CFO of Walmart, he is interviewed in the book. And he was talking to me about COVID. And then he's no longer in this world. I dedicated book to him as well. This is really sad that a country with so many resources were kind of in a situation where they felt helpless. I don't want to undermine how our medical fraternity and many other first responders reacted to this, and how they really helped us, and how quickly we came out with a vaccine. But despite the fact, I think our results are reflective of how we as leaders failed across the globe.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that lots of good evidence to back your thesis up. I would say, it's interesting because you and I spend a lot of our time, with younger emerging professionals, and obviously you provide counsel as well to more senior executives. And one of the sort of themes, at least I read into your work, is a sense or an urgency for leaders to be sort of more bold and brave and speak their mind, perhaps speak truth to power even. And I often get the question from younger professionals or professionals earlier in their career, certainly, that they feel somewhat uncomfortable doing that. That they're somewhat unclear about the boundaries, of what they can and can't cross, can and can't say. And so I'm wondering whether you think there's some nuance to that counsel, and that there are perhaps parameters for leaders in training about being brave and bold at work that might be different as you become a bit more seasoned and senior. So how would you advise? We all have a boss. And we need to sort of, most of us need to stay employed, for example. So how do you balance leadership and bravery with longevity and employment, I guess?
That's a great question, Michael. But if with your permission, I would be remiss if I don't acknowledge in COVID how well NYU and their leadership, from President Andy Hamilton to everyone, how well we led through the COVID, right? Even now we're talking about, in November of 2021, how masks are required in the classroom, how strict protocols are followed. So NYU, which is, one of the largest universities in the world, and especially the largest with the international students, all the measures that they have taken, if we didn't do that, I think we would be in a very different state. So I want to acknowledge that, not because it's my university, but it's really as an outsider looking at it. I think we would be remiss if we don't acknowledge that. Yeah, no,
I could not agree more. I think many aspects of how we handled COVID have our best practice and definitely reflected well on the university's administration. So I could not agree more.
And coming back to your question, I think that's a very, very important question, especially young professionals when they're entering the world. They say, hey, I am not the leader here, I'm not the boss. People have to realize that power doesn't come with your title. It comes with your value. People think that, I need this job. But if you think about it, that if you're a value contributor in the system, then the leaders need you. Leaders are more dependent on their people than people are dependent on their leader. So people can be polite and firm at the same time. And I'm seeing more resilience and entrepreneurial spirit in a lot of young people who enter. And I was coaching a young student, and I was talking to her, and I asked her that, hey, what are your plans when everyone go back to work? Because right now you're working remotely. And she said, well, when that happens, I'll quit. I said, well, why would you quit? She said, because I know that I provide enough value for companies and there would be someone who would allow me to work remotely. And I'm very confident about that, right? So people, when they realize that when you work for an organization and you make yourself a value-added partner, I think some kind of a swag of, confidence will come with it. Now, understand the difference between entitlement and confidence. Confidence is something that you earn. Entitlement is something that you think you have earned, and there's a huge difference. So I think people who are really entering the workforce, the day one, you want to make sure that you really put value in the organization and you become a most integral part of the team, and they value what you do. And once they value what you do, I think then you'll have a lot of power to say what you wanted to say.
Yeah, I sometimes give people the counsel that they need to become an expert in something. It's helpful, I think, early on in your career to be, a trusted advisor or a trusted source of information about some aspect of the business or some, of the context or the culture or something. This question about, young emerging leaders and the generations, we talk a lot about millennials and Gen Z. The book is, I think, very thoughtful in the way it counsels leaders to manage, the new generation or a younger generation who arguably have a set of beliefs and attitudes and values that are either different or have emerged in a different context through their life experience. And so I think it provides a lot of thoughtful guidance in that area. And I wondered whether you yourself had sort of projected forward and thought about what the millennial, the Gen Z of today might look like as a leader, in their 50s or 40s or what have you. What do you think? How different do you think leadership will look like, in 10, 20, 30 years?
Oh, 30 years. It looks like eternity. The kind of progress that we are making. I think this is interesting. Obviously, I think the world would be very diverse. I see an increased role of women and people with different ethnic and lifestyle background. But more importantly, I think 30 years from now, Michael, they may be leading robots and artificial intelligence instead of people, right? If you work for Amazon or some of these companies, you're still trying to manage Alexa and Siri, right? So I think, it will shift from people to machines, and machine learning is playing a critical role. You probably, as an academic director, you may have 50 faculty members like me, old or young, and then you may have 50 robotics or some artificial intelligence faculty members who probably will be doing a different job than we are doing, right? So it'll be an interesting thing, but they must be prepared to do that. And I believe our next generation is very smart. But that shift would be very interesting when you have to manage machines instead of people.
Yeah, well, that's an absolutely fascinating thought. I mean, clearly there are a number of industries where that kind of, machine supported or artificial intelligence powered, work appears to be, taking the role of otherwise, humans employed in those positions. And there's clearly, as you know, a big debate in education about how and whether or when that might start happening in education itself. But this question about integrating AI and machine learning and other forms of automation or predictive modeling into our work, I think is a critical aspect, perhaps, that we've even tried to teach or certainly what are trying to teach, that balance between what we sometimes call in the program human-centered and data-driven. And I think that seems to be something that leaders will be even more, we will, companies and organizations they lead will require even more of them in their ability to balance those things. Any other sort of aspects? I'm always fascinated about problem solving. So one of the things when we talk to, in my case, it would be, marketing companies and agencies and PR firms, things like that. My colleagues in HR are talking to, talent management functions, etc. So, but a lot of what's expected of our students now is what I broadly call, to borrow a phrase from Rita McGrath, I guess, is thinking around corners, and a sort of a different form of problem solving, perhaps, than the one that was more linear or traditionally more linear. You spoke to a lot of leaders, and I wonder whether there were any examples of people, or comments made by some of your friends and interviewees about this capacity to sort of think around corners and just problem solve in a different way than perhaps historically was expected.
Yeah, and I think this is an interesting conversation. As Michael, you and I both teach marketing, right? We are seeing the role of behavioral marketing a lot more today, right? And the reason for that is because there are predictable models which are ready to behave, right? When I park my car in the garage, it tells me NYU is 7 minutes walk, right? And what happened is that this is going to be an influential marketing from the attitudes, right? And when you influence attitude, it leads to behavior. The future leaders probably would have a lot more knowledge and information about their consumer, their employees, and their partners. Because today, everything is virtually predictable. I used to say that no one knows me better than I do. But I think Facebook knows me better than I do, right? Because it reminds me of things that I've forgotten. And it is always accurate, right? Sometimes it's, intrusion into your privacy. But again, I've given them permission when I became a part of that to really intrude that. So I think the more information that we have, the more knowledge that we have. Now, knowledge is not always necessarily positive, right? Sometimes knowing too much about something makes you too dependent. When you and I went to school, we had to do full research, and we had to translate that data, whatever was available, through our insights into useful information. Today, there are tools available that comes to you as that, hey, if you're looking for someone between age 15 and 25 who is willing to buy an eyeliner in this zip code, they can tell you who's thinking about it right now, right? So that makes you more dependent and less intriguing, or, it's an interesting, I think it would be an interesting conundrum for our teachers, right? And you're talking about the corners, right? The generation, I'm an older Gen X, we have seen both of them, right? I'm not a digital native. I have adapted to it, right? So if you take away internet from my house, I can function. I can find ways to read a book and translate that. I am just worried about this problem solving of the generation, which is so highly dependent on some of the tools, which are very useful, no question about it. And I'm a victim of that as well. But I think we as teachers owe it to ourselves to provide them, how to drive a manual car and also an automatic. I always tell my students that when you grow up and you get to my age, your kids would laugh at it and say, Mom, do you really know how to drive a car? Why did you need to drive a car? Because all cars are self-driven. So I think it'll be an interesting time to see.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very fair point. And, we had some time with Rashad Tabakawala, last year, and he talks a lot about that sort of mental apparatus and how you need to constantly sort of fine tune that, even in a world in which, as you said, information is rapidly and easily available. You actually have a nice sort of formula or recipe, maybe I could call it, where you talk about the 12 critical traits of leadership. I wonder whether you could share that with us all. And it was one or two I wanted to go into afterwards, but maybe you could give us an overview of the framework in the book. So
these are 12 traits of leadership. Now, I am not saying, Michael, if you don't have all 12 of them, you cannot be a leader. I've seen many successful leaders with many of them missing. But these are some critical traits that I see in leadership. One is the innovative vision, right? So, vision is what makes you a leader, right? You can see things that others can't. Then a risk-taking mentality. I believe that the biggest risk is not taking one. So leaders by nature are risk takers. Resilience, this is one of the key factor, how resilient you are, because failure is not optional, it's a requirement, when you are on a path of leadership. And if you're not able to be resilient and you don't have the tenacity, then I think it becomes very challenging. Caring for others, that's what makes you a servant leader. I've seen many successful leaders who didn't care for people. Now, that makes you a leader. It doesn't make you a good leader. Transparency in communication. Leaders must be very transparent. It's critical for every level of leader to be transparent, because when you become transparent, you gain trust, which is one of the centrifugal force of relationship. Trust is important. Confidence, right? You got to have that confidence. If you're not confident in yourself, people will not have confidence in you. Intuition. Now, the intuition is something, either you have it or you don't have it. You can't do exercises to become intuitive, but if you're gifted with that, you're very lucky. The ability to inspire others, and that doesn't have to do with your personality, your background. If you look at some of the greatest political leaders, their personality is not as attractive. Some of them are repulsive, to be honest, but they have this art of inspiring others and motivating people. So that's important. Patience. Patience is really an important virtue that every leader should have. When people reach out to me and say something, I want to give an immediate reaction. When I sleep over it next day, I feel different about it. So it's very important for a good leader to be really patient. Self-control. This is what's, if you have everything else and if you don't have self-control, sooner or later, you're going to get in trouble. And sometimes you're lucky to get out of that trouble, but many big, successful, great leaders have fell prey to this. Integrity. Integrity is very hard to explain to someone who really doesn't believe in it. I believe that is a cornerstone of leadership, because if you have nothing else in integrity, it's something that you can always look in the mirror and be thankful to. The ability to delegate, the last but not the least, leaders don't actually work any more than other people do. They actually work less, but they are able to delegate their functions to other people, because leader has two jobs, to be a critical thinker, innovator, visionary, and open doors for others. Hire the best people and get out of their way. So in my opinion, those are the 12 traits that will help. Now, when you're a student or a young professional, you look at them, and in the book, we have a test where you can self-evaluate yourself and find out, how good are you in resilience? How good are you in caring for others? And there are some areas that you can work on. So if you're not caring for others, what are things that you can do to be more caring? So the book explains that, and it has a couple of self-evaluative tests in there.
Yeah, well, maybe we could pick up on that area of caring for others and empathy. I think my sense is that empathy is perhaps one of the most talked about topics in leadership in the recent, couple of years. And certainly I've seen that dialogue amp up in marketing circles, in the last 6 months to 12 months. I guess somewhat as a response and a reaction to, how we treat each other during COVID and providing resources and support for each other, but generally, even in the context of consumer marketing, people have been talking about empathy. Could you share perhaps some stories about executives, who you think really evidenced empathy, or how does that topic, when you were chatting to all these wonderful senior leaders, how would they talk about that? How would they frame those kind of concerns?
Yeah, I would share a real life example. When 9/11 happened, I used to work for MetLife, and MetLife was the largest insurance company back then. And 9/11 was a very unique and sad incident in American history. As you know, that when the towers came down, there was a company called Cantor Fitzgerald. And that company probably had the most employees, in that building, a lot more than any other company. Interestingly, that company was insured by MetLife. So, insurance companies are always, they depend on their actuaries to tell them exactly how many people will die each year, and they're pretty accurate. No company is prepared that, on one day, you will lose 1,500 people, which you never planned for. Now, when that happened is obviously 9/11 happened, every other company, insurance company was thinking, what are we going to do? So there's some legal, department people came out and told our CEO that, hey, in an insurance clause, there's a clause which says that we will not pay a claim if it's an act of war. And that will save us hundreds of millions of dollars. And our CEO looked at it and said, at times, you have to be more empathetic than a business oriented. We are virtually at a war, and we are the largest company. If we come out with this clause, every other company will follow. We were one of the first company to announce that we'll pay the death claims without a death certificate. That was very unusual, and every other company had to follow. So as a leader, there are times that your empathy has to take over every other aspect of leadership. And if you don't have empathy, then it can make you probably a successful leader in the short term, but not in the long term, because there are two types of leaders: leaders who lead by love and leaders who lead by fear. Now, fear becomes more effective in the short term, but in the long term, leaders who lead by love, they are always more sustainable.
Yeah, I'm reminded of a wonderful quote by Cornel West, who's I think Harvard then Princeton philosopher. Actually, may have recently left both places, but a preacher, and he talks about, he says you have to love the people to lead the people, you have to serve the people to save the people. And I've always thought that was a very a powerful insight to real servant leadership and the capacity to understand that your job is not to be in charge of per se, but really to support other people in a team and provide them what they need to grow and to learn. And it makes me think a little bit about the list of 12 criteria and how that perhaps has evolved over time. I know you discussed this in the book, and I thought therefore it'd be interesting to some of our students and listeners to hear a bit more about it, about some of the ways that new sort of criteria have emerged over the last few years. And I think you identified three new criteria, but so perhaps you could speak to sort of what you see as some of these additional emerging criteria on top of the 12 that you originally identified.
Right. Yeah, I think, and one thing which I also want to talk about, the importance is of having resilience, right? Especially in these times, right? And resilience is something that really leaders have to understand, not giving up. One example that I always think about is Jack Ma, who's the founder and CEO of Alibaba, right? When you look at his story, he was an English teacher in China, and he failed virtually every exam that he took, poor in math. He was rejected from Harvard 10 times. He probably was turned down for more than 30 jobs. And the interesting, if you read his story, the interesting part is when he was interviewed, when KFC came to China, there were 24 people who went for job interviews. 23 of them got selected, and there was only one person who didn't get selected. That was Jack Ma. Now, of course, money is not the only way to measure someone's success. But he created Alibaba. He's worth over $40 billion, and he talks about it. But he was so resilient. He was so tenacious that he would always come back. And yes, these are some classic models. But there are 3 or 4 traits that stand out to me today. One is the flexibility. I think I consider that as the most important reason. When you look at, this is a book, right? Where would my book be sold? Obviously, we have a great publisher. You can buy it from Amazon. You can buy it from Barnes and Noble. You can buy it from, directly from a publisher. But if you look at, when Amazon came into business in 1994, they started selling books online. And at that time, We had a huge book chain called Borders, and they're no longer in the business, and Barnes and Nobles, right? Now, when Amazon came in and they said, we're going to sell books online, everybody made fun of them, including Borders. Borders said, you can take our online orders. Borders is out of business, and Borders probably in their best years did about $2 billion in sales. Barnes and Noble is still there. They're not very strong as a company. On the best years, they had about maybe $4 billion in sales. And there we have Amazon, which is thriving with a couple of $100 billion in sales, I think 233 or whatever their last number was. And the reason this company has done so well, Amazon, is because this is one of the most flexible company in the world. I can assure you, not assure you, almost assure you that Barnes and Nobles will never make a car. Barnes and Nobles will never sell food, right? Directly. I can never say that about Amazon. They can virtually do anything because they adapt to the timing. So I think flexibility is one. Second is diversity, equity, and inclusion. This is not optional anymore. We live in one of the most diverse countries in the world, and leaders who are not understanding, and diversity comes as a ethnic diversity, gender diversity, lifestyle diversity. I mean, look at NYU. I mean, that's like an international school, truly. And if you're not able to adapt to diversity and understand that as a business case, no matter how good you are as a leader, somehow you'll fail because it's going to come back to you. And especially the next generation, which is very neutral about this, will not accept you as a leader. And I think third one is the sustainable part, right? Every leader wants to leave the company better than he or she found. All of us who are leaders, it is our responsibility to leave this world better than we have found it. We are, again, Michael, failing that. And at best, we probably have a C- grade at this time on that. We need to really do more to make this place more sustainable, the whole earth, and environmentally more sustainable. So I think those are the three factors that I see.
Right. Yeah, and they're clearly imperatives for business leadership and businesses more generally, and the kinds of topics that I think are getting worked appropriately more directly into the conversations around building brands and the work that marketers do explicitly in the consumer marketplace or the B2B market space even. I wonder whether you see some distinction between I think you started to lean in there. A lot of our students, for example, come from family businesses or want to start their own businesses, and they see themselves perhaps as much as entrepreneurs as they would say that they are leaders. That maybe their aspiration is not per se to be a leader, but somehow to be a successful entrepreneur. And I wonder whether you have some thoughts about what you'd consider the difference or overlaps perhaps between leadership and entrepreneurship.
Yeah, this is a great question. So I think it was about 5 years ago, I was speaking at a conference at Harvard. And one of the young students stood up and said, hey, in your background, you have spent 20 years in corporate America. And then for the last 6-7 years at that time, you have been an entrepreneur. What is the difference when you work for a company and you own a company? I said, when you work for a company, your salary is guaranteed, your job is not guaranteed. When you're an entrepreneur, your job is guaranteed, but your salary is not guaranteed. Now, a lot of young people who are entering the workforce, they are pretty open to being entrepreneurs because there are many successful examples that we know of. And they both are gifted entrepreneurs and leaders. I have written a whole chapter about that. Every entrepreneur is not a leader. When you're an entrepreneur, you're proving that you really have the capacity to be innovative and create a product or a service. You necessarily may not know how to lead, right? And I think entrepreneurs are more innovative and flexible, and leaders are more adaptable, right? Now, they're mutually inclusive at times, but they both are very gifted. Now, it's very critical for every entrepreneur to understand that, hey, I may not have the leadership skills. So either I really go through the training that's needed, or like as Mark Zuckerberg has done, is let's bring Sheryl Sandberg to run my company and let me be the chief innovator, which I really enjoy being in. But entrepreneurs, face this challenge when they expand as a business, they lack some basic leadership traits. And it's very important for them, for their success, because sometimes their product is so good that their immediate success might guide them in the wrong direction, that, hey, you know how to do it all. Leadership is a completely different skill set, which you need to understand and really be able to adopt. Not all leaders have to be entrepreneurs, but all entrepreneurs have to be leaders.
Yeah, it's a fascinating distinction, actually. I think it's something that perhaps deserves a bit more exploration as well. As some of our programming leans more towards entrepreneurship. I think this idea of really thinking through the more specific lessons, as you outline a number of them in your book, for leadership in the context of entrepreneurship, and the demands that puts on the people trying to do both, grow businesses and lead teams. This whole area, one of our questions from the panel, for the panel, or for you, I guess, is around, sort of back to this question about empathy to some extent, and joining two thoughts together. One is empathy and the other is diversity, equity, and inclusion. And the question really is, what can leaders do better, you think, to understand the context and background of their employers' reality, their employees' reality, so that they are more empathetic? So, what have you witnessed, or in your conversations learned about the very specific, more tactical actions that leaders take in order to be more empathetic and certainly be more cognizant, aware, and responsive to the diversity of their employee base and creating an inclusive environment?
Okay, I think that's a great question. And you know what? COVID-19 has provided us a perfect playground for that. So when COVID-19 came, many of us started working remotely. Now, Michael, you and I could be in a different stage of my life than someone who is a single mother and 28 years old and have to drop a kid to school. So when companies, people adapted to this remote culture, people realized that, hey, you don't have to come to work. Earlier, your work hours was 9 to 5, and you used to take a lunch break, 12 to 1. And now you're not coming to work, so you should be available at 8 a.m. Now, I may have to drop my kids to school, and people were completely, insensitive about that. Everyone is scheduling meetings, and the lunch break is completely gone. People don't realize, and we expect, if you and I have the facility to have a room in our house or apartment where we can do Zoom calls, not everybody has that same luxury, right? So we have to understand that, how the empathy is, because put yourself in someone else's shoes and understand what challenges they may be going through. As them, we demand that, hey, everybody should, have their camera on. Okay, if that's the policy, that's fine. But sometimes they may have kids or pets around in that room that they may not be able to do that. So I've seen some companies that they came out with a dress code for Zoom calls. I understand when it's a client's meeting, you want to be careful, but a company demanding for things, and people are working longer hours. So we have to really put ourselves in someone else's shoes and understand the challenges that they're facing. It's really putting mental health issues on people. Now, this is a good segue for diversity, equity, and inclusion. This is one of the most talked about, but a widely misunderstood topic, right? Now, people don't realize, depending on what part of the world you're in, you may not have ethnic diversity in India, China, Pakistan, but you have gender diversity, right? You have other diversities. So diversity is basically who we are, and inclusion is what you do with it. Diversity is a fact. Inclusion is a choice. And equity is something which is providing fair and impartial ability to share things with others. If a company does not create a conducive environment for everyone to be inclusive, they are going to lose some great minds. People have to understand, it's not even optional. We live in a very diverse country in the US. Every third person in America is ethnically diverse, either Asian American, Hispanic American, or Black American. And you have to realize that they are going to be a majority by 2040, or just right after that. 50% of the population consists of women. but we still have our programs and everything drive that man is in a decision-making mode. They are not. So we really have to understand, if you want them to be inclusive, you have to adapt to that changing environment.
Yeah, and I think that the discussion you have in the book about these phrases and these terms and how they are operationalized within a company is a very interesting part of the book, is a very interesting aspect of the book. I wanted to pivot a little bit. We probably have maybe sort of eight minutes left together. And I don't want to miss you. You do have an interesting chapter on the role of education and leadership. And, obviously that's near and dear to my heart. And I wonder whether you could share some thoughts about what you think the new demands or the new realities and your thinking about rethinking leadership, how you might, what story you would tell to the leaders of higher education about the future, either the future of education or as an industry, or the future of what they need to be teaching emerging leaders.
Yeah, Michael, you and I had a conversation about that a few years ago as well. I personally believe the whole education system needs a refurbishing, right? To say the least. We're using the system which is 100 years old. When I went to school, and I'm not disowning my schools, I think they have played a critical role in who I am. But if you want to really look at it, when we educate, students, we put them so focused on grades. I've hired thousands of people in my career. You must have hired as well. And I have never asked anyone what was your GPA. But the students have first question, is this going to be on a test or exam? If it's not, then I don't have to learn it. Right? And if it's going to be in the test, I can learn it and learn it. We really need to create a more problem-solving approach and I'm talking more now higher education. It has to be a student-led programming as well. We have to see that, how do we engage them, that they don't retain that information only for a semester, but they really walk out of, so in my classrooms, the whole semester, they're working on a project. How are you going to revive Airbnb or AMC or any Disney company who are really struggling? That's your job, because in real life, that's what you're going to do. Now, all the regression modeling that you're going to learn, yes, that's very important for you as an analyst. But 80% of the things that I've learned in school and education, I've forgotten about it because I never applied. And if you look at the people who were the smartest in your class when you were in a middle school, they're doing okay. But those backbenchers who are always challenging the system and not getting good grades, they're very successful in their lives. So I think we really need to revisit, and we have to have more engagement from our students to really see how we can prepare better leaders for tomorrow who really are able to solve problems. And some of them even create the problems that don't exist and then solve them. And that's how, some of the successful people have done.
Yeah, I wonder, it might be a good springboard, your comments there, for a sort of question, a somewhat final question, but that wraps up a few questions in the chat, and also something I love to ask all of our guests who join us, which is around, what counsel and advice would you give to emerging leaders? Is there some single piece of advice or some sort of syndrome or sort of collection of not the word syndrome, but sort of a collection of important pieces of advice that you would give to somebody, or the other way perhaps to think or frame the question is if there were a set of skills that you would say, I think all people going through, say, a graduate program, or perhaps emerging from undergrad college, they really ought to be thinking about these 4 or 5 skill sets to prepare themselves for a future lifetime. What would your counsel be, for emerging young professionals to sort of best prepare themselves for a leadership in the next generation?
Yeah, I think they're the smartest generation, right? Every generation is smarter than their previous generation. I believe so, right? They have a lot of tools available. In marketing, we always say that know your audience first, right? Who's your target audience? The advice for younger generation that I have is know your target audience. People that you'll be working with are from the Gen Zs or maybe Gen X or the baby boomers. Now, they may have different rules of engagement, and try to, you don't have to completely adapt to them, but you have to understand that they're looking at things from a different lens. And these are the people for the next few years. They're the people who are going to promote you. They're going to, value you. So when you walk into an organization, have the confidence, but don't have the arrogance that, hey, I'm smarter. Yes, you are very smart, no question about it. But try to create value. Try to be unique. Make sure that, within first few months, you're able to prove that you are bringing some value proposition that they may not have. And every person of my generation, older generation, are looking forward to bring this younger generation and complement what we don't have. The only time that we lose it, when you rub against us and you make us feel that, the soft skills that are requirement, when people walk in without a notebook, even in a classroom, and they open their laptops, they may be taking notes, but I have an impression you'd probably be sitting on WeChat or Instagram and doing things. So pay attention, because for the next few years, I think we will probably be deciding about your careers. So understand that you engage your next audience as well, and be a complementary tool to them instead of really competing with them.
Yeah, well, that's very powerful set of advice. And maybe I'll sort of jam in one last quick one. Do you think leadership can be taught? We had an attendee who asked that question, or is it something that's more innate, or something at least that has to be crafted over a long term? Like, it's a life, lessons learned from life rather than something you can formally teach.
Yeah, there's a chapter in the book, Are the Leaders Born or Made? This is a long life question, and I think it's a combination. There are some traits that you have. When Malala Yousafzai was shot at age 13 or 14, she didn't give up. She had the resilience, and she got a Nobel Prize, at young age of 17 or 18. So obviously there are some traits that we have. We are all born leaders. It's the environment that really takes away that leadership skills from us, but there are a lot of things that we can learn. And that's what the book talks about. What are the things that you can really polish upon, and you can really become better leaders by just practicing those.
Well, I want to thank you genuinely for your time, Tariq. I feel like I was in a lovely conversation that we might typically have had in the halls of Midtown offices, or perhaps sitting in your classroom. And I want to thank you for sharing some of these thoughts with us. The book is a fabulous book, available, I think, now already on Amazon. It launches this week, or is in the process of launching. You probably have more details on that, but I encourage you all to get the book. We're hoping actually to adopt it in now some of our C-suite classes next semester, and encourage faculty to use the book and to integrate it into their teaching. But Leadership in Changing Times by Tariq Khan, look out for that. And on behalf of all the students and others who joined the call, we did have a few extra questions, which I'll sort of package up and get to you, Tariq. And then maybe when we send a note out with the recording, we can add some extra bonus material. But it just remains for me to thank you profoundly, honestly, for sharing some of this wisdom. And I encourage our students to delve into the book, because there's lots and lots of great stories and interviews and wonderful quotes as well from Tariq, which I'm already stealing. They're just a very, very wise words. So Tariq, thank you so much for spending this part of this afternoon with us, and we appreciate your counsel.
No, Michael, thank you. And thank you to Robin and Patrick as well. And thanks to NYU for giving me this opportunity. I'm truly excited in next semester to teach even a C-suite course, which I love. But thank you again for giving me the opportunity.
Bye.